Welcome to Loading Ready Live. Today on the show, we reflect on the passage of history in Danketh Ranked. You know everything's gonna be alright when Gib answers your tweets. We sharpen our shovels and cross our fingers in hard cottage core fashion. Explosion. And we decide to check out some new digs in House Haunters Canada. Never before have so many done so much for so many, all the time, forever. All this and more on Loading Ready Live, starting right now.
Hey, this is Flip, and I just wanted to do a quick walkthrough of the moon base that I built in Duke3D for the Loading Ready Live intro this month, and I just wanted to go through in absolutely more detail than it could possibly deserve some of the things that I did to make this work. So let's take a look around, shall we? Obviously the place to start is the friend zone, because it's got the most interesting stuff going on, and it's probably the place that I spent the most time on. When I started doing this, I was just sort of doing it for my own benefit. I thought like maybe they'd use it, maybe they wouldn't, but I just like tinker around with it. So I started just doing the friend zone, and just every time I got bored I'd load this up for a couple of hours and like make some changes, add some more stuff. So this has had a lot of time, just raw time spent on it. But then once I actually showed it off to the crew and they were like, hey, we actually want to use this, that's when I started building out the rest of the area. So it got built out a lot faster because I was like, I want to get this done. I want to make sure that it's in their hands in enough time for them to make use of it. So it's still good. Like, I still like how it all came together, but this has definitely had more time put into it. So obviously we've got the giant Mark V wall and some other trinkets around that I threw together. Most of this level I tried to make it so that the textures are all like standard ones that come with the game. Like this wall comes with the game, all of these artworks and these windows and chairs and stuff. There is all stuff that comes with the game. And I wanted to make a few custom art pieces to stick on walls and stuff for just to make it look better. Like, there's obviously no Mark V wall in the game. And I sort of wanted to do that just to make it sort of in the same vein as the Animal Crossing fly-through and the Sims fly-through that they'd done previously. Like the Animal Crossing fly-through was almost all just Animal Crossing stuff, like it's Animal Crossing walls and dividers and doors and like the TV cameras and all that sort of stuff. It's all just Animal Crossing stuff. But there were like a few custom art things for mostly just the MK5 wall and a couple of other bits and pieces. And the Sims one was basically the same. It's mostly all Sim stuff, but there were a couple of custom things like the MK5 or the Crocodile board and those sorts of things. So I wanted to do sort of the same thing. Like, I wanted this to look like a Duke3D level, but with a handful of bits in there. So the things in here that are custom are like the MK5 wall itself, this side wall next to it, because I wanted to make sure they looked the same. So there's the same shade of blue for the dark part of the Mark V wall. It's the same shade of blue that's over here, and the same sort of speckling. You sort of need to have that speckling because all of the textures actually come with the game. These are all like digitized photographs, so obviously they're photos. They're going to have an amount of film grain, and then they've been digitized with whatever digitization technology they had back in the 90s, which had some noise on its own, and then it got down converted to the game palette, which required some dithering as well. So there's a lot of like random noise on these. So when you're making your own custom textures, you sort of want to add a bit of random noise in there as well. Otherwise it sort of looks just way too glossy and out of place. So there's an amount of speckling here, there's an amount of speckling in the background of the gratitude wall and those sorts of things. But I didn't want to use, like, say, the carpet, because the carpet is extremely speckly. So if you compare, like, the carpet to the Mark V wall, the carpet is a built-in texture and it's extremely noisy because it's carpet. It's supposed to have, you know, corners and edges, and well, not corners, but angles, and like bits of it are lighter than other bits because they're in the shadow of other bits because it's all strands of etc. Whereas this is supposed to look like it's a flat wall, but there's some noise in the photo. So it's a lot less noisy than this. So that's why this is a custom texture, and then the Mark V wall. And then to build the Mark V wall itself, obviously I didn't actually measure the lengths of everyone's names. That would have taken way more time than I had. So all of these lengths are just like random. I made a little Python script to generate a bunch of lines at random lengths, and then I used Glimpse to make the actual MK5 as a mask over the top of that to make them white instead of light blue. I did a similar thing for the gratitude wall. The actual like load-bearing gratitude wall sign at the top there is a recreation. I built that to look as much like the real thing as possible. I first tried taking an actual screenshot of the actual wall itself and then converting that, but it wasn't turning out very well, so I just recreated it, tried to get the fonts as close as I possibly could. I'm not really a font person, but the fonts seem to match up as well as I could get them. And then these are again just a bunch of random lengths. I tried to bias the lengths so that like medium lengths are like most of them are medium lengths, and then there's a handful of really long ones, because I reckon that just makes it look more real. There's no science behind that. I just stuck a bias on there and say, hey, that looks neat. There is a bit of a trick here though, in that the two long ones and the two short ones are actually the same. There's only 3 sprites here, and then these ones are repeated. But it was incredibly obvious when they were just side by side that they were identical. So what I did is that one of these is upside down, and you absolutely can't notice unless you're paying like the greatest attention that, like, say this one starts with like short, and then a really long one, and then some short ones, and then this one at the bottom is short, and then a really long one. Like, no one's going to notice that. It absolutely does not read that these are the same. But there is a slight hiccup that again you'd never notice, which is that these ones are like slightly dark at the bottom to make it look like it has a slight bevel, and then these ones are slightly light at the bottom because that's actually supposed to be the top of the sprite, and so the lighting's slightly wrong at the very bottom, and also at the very top they're like dark at the top when they're supposed to be like an outset bevel. But again, like, you barely notice it because if you're looking at this, you're looking at the middle, and the left and right still work because they're not flipped left to right, they're only flipped top to bottom. What else was custom? Obviously the magic cards. There's no magic card sprite in Duke3D. I couldn't get a clean shot of the magic cards, like the magic card sheet that they have at the office. I scanned through a lot of Friday night's footage looking for like a nice clean shot of their thing, and there were like a handful that had like a corner, like maybe like a quarter of it, and then there would be like one that had like a different quarter, but the lighting was different, so if you tried to stitch them together, they didn't look right, and then it was just a mess. So this is actually my uncut sheet that I own, that I got from Desert Bus 6, Desert Bus 7, whichever one was in 2012, because it's a sheet of M13. The only difference is that I cut out this one in the bottom right to make it a white panel, because the sheet that LoadingReadyRun has is an Illustrator Uncommons sheet, and that has a blank space down here, just because of the number of cards in the set. So even though the cards themselves don't actually match, this bottom corner here gives it a bit of verisimilitude. And then obviously the crokinole board, you can't not have the crokinole board. Though I am a little bit unhappy with how the crokinole board came out. Obviously the snake came out reasonably well, but the eagle is a bit hard to see. Like, the actual eagle colour and the background colour came to about the same, because there are like a lot of different browns in the palette. The whole game is palletized, and it's a fixed palette you can't change. So, and they have a lot of like shades of brown, but they don't have a lot of like hues of brown, like a more orangey brown or a more yellowy brown. They don't really have like a lot of different variations in there, so the eagle sort of fades into the background. And often when I find I'm looking at this claw up here ends up reading to me as eyes, because those like black dots end up looking like eyes to me. I don't see this eye over here. I'm like, oh, okay, so the eagle's up here, and then this claw ends up like, is that a beak? Is that what that's supposed to be? And then like, I'm completely screwed. I can't see anything. It just looks like a mess. But then if you stare at it long enough, you see that, oh, the eagle's head's over here. This is actually just a talon. And I could have touched that up, but I'm not a pixel artist. This isn't something that I'm good at. I tried a little, but there wasn't like a quick trick. I'd have to like redraw a bunch of this, which, you know, if this was a professional product, I'd do, but this is just, it works. You're not staring at this. You're like, the camera's over here and you sort of sweep past it, so it doesn't matter. Like, it's good enough as it is. And then in the hallway, these circles and this arrow are obviously custom as well. There are circles in the tile set, but there isn't this arrow. And I was like, if I'm making the arrow, I might make the circles so that they match. And these actually are a flat color with no noise, no speckling, and that's just to make them, like I was saying before, if you do that, they look like flat, glossy plastic, and that's exactly what I want these to look like. I want these to look like flat, glossy plastic, so that they pop a bit off the wall, and so that they look shiny, even though there's no actual shine on them. And then the final pieces of custom art are the 4 parts that I set up so that the crew could slot in their parts for the shows that they were actually going to do, like the actual segments. Because I didn't want to have to give them the map and go, hey, here's what I've got. Once you know what the segments are, let me know and I'll edit the map to put the text in. Because obviously I didn't want to have to edit the map. I didn't want to have to make it so that they had to tell me what the segments are going to be and then wait for me to do the thing. Especially because with time zones, I wasn't going to be around for much during their actual planning meeting. Like, I live in Australia, so Loading Ready Live starts at about 11 AM on a Sunday. So I can be around for like a few hours before that, if my sleep schedule is working, which currently isn't. But I can't be around for like their actual planning meeting because it's like about o'clock in the morning for me. And I didn't want to put myself as a dependency in their situation. So I made it so that these are just textures. These are just custom textures in the art file, and it's a lot easier to edit just textures in the art file than it is to edit the whole level. Like, learning how to use the map editor for this game is a process, but learning how to use the art editor to just replace a texture, that's pretty simple. That's like 3 or 4 steps. So I made it so that this is a custom texture. This light box, the contents of this TV is a custom texture. I threw RoadQuest in there because it was one of the few things I could find that like fit in the palette with all of its like browns and greens and stuff. This I have as just a plain grey slate, but they can stick magnetic letters on there. And then this chalkboard, which is just a bunch of green and brown stippling. I think this came out okay. This is like the one thing that I just drew, as opposed to like this is just plain that's swiped. These are like generated by scripts, and the gratitude wall thing is copying thing. Whereas this is the one thing I actually drew. I think it turned out alright, even if it's very simple. I'm not an artist. So yeah, that's sort of the custom stuff in here. Everything else is stuff that comes with the game, like all of these little trinkets of like this bottle and this soft serve cup, this stack of cups. For some reason I just assumed that they would just have a giant stack of used coffee cups, or like plastic cups, because who throws things out? Random cups and bowls, and, a notepad. They're just random trinkets that are in the game. Same thing over here. Coffee machine and stuff. Just random stuff that I found lying around at the tile set. There is one interesting thing, which is this refrigerator. There's no refrigerator sprite in the game. There's no refrigerator texture, but this isn't actually a thing. It's all right. I put just an actual force field here to stop people from wandering in, because I haven't built the food zone, the eater place, because you can't actually see it. Like you never actually see that when you're doing the fly through, because you're only looking up the hallway from like down here, because you get to see this. So you're never actually going to look down there. But just to make it really obvious that you're not supposed to go down there, I put this force field just to say no, don't. But if I just walk through there, this fridge is actually just a plain white texture with like some slopes around the edges, and then just this single sprite that's just a line across the thing. And I borrowed that from one of the levels that's actually in the game. In one of the levels in the New World Order campaign, from the 20th anniversary, they have this hotel room that has this little kitchen, and in it is this refrigerator. And it's the same trick. It's just like white walls and some angled floor, angled walls, and just this horizontal line sprite, and then a couple of extra things for the handles. I'm not entirely certain what this sprite is supposed to be. It's horribly stretched, and I've never been entirely clear what it's actually supposed to be. It looks like it's either a hook, or maybe it's like a quarter of a drain pipe or something. I've never understood this sprite, but they've stretched out here and used it as handles. So I thought, that's neat. I'm going to borrow that and stick it in the Moonbase. And I had a look around the rest of this kitchen and tried to see if there's anything else that we could use, like this thing that they've used as a stovetop and range hood and all these sorts of things. But these aren't things that are actually in the Moonbase kitchen, and I don't think it would make sense for them to have a plate full of head or a blood knife. So yeah, none of that really made the cut. But the fridge I used. Yeah, so that's how I built the fridge, although obviously I didn't have the handles there because the Moonbase fridge doesn't have handles. It's just plain. So didn't bother with that. And then this washing machine is the same thing. It's just a thing with a line. But this is a filing cabinet that's been stretched to look like drawers. And obviously their drawers don't look anything like that, but it works. Whatever. Again, it fits, and it was in the real tile set, so I didn't have to come up with anything of my own. Speaking of this invisible wall, I actually put a lot of invisible walls in this in this map because I wanted to make it so it would always be smooth and easy to get around. Things like this doorway, if you get stuck in the doorway, you could get wedged up in this corner, and if you were looking the other way and trying to move sideways or something, you could get rammed into that corner and just get stuck, and it would get in the way of the flow of actually doing the fly through. So there's invisible walls directly in front of these doors, which obviously don't open. There's nothing behind them. But also there's a table. You can't get on the table. You can't get on the chairs. Everything on this has invisible walls around it, because I kept on doing, when I was doing practice runs, I would be looking at the light box, and then I'd turn around to look at the TV, and I'd walk over and I'd stand on top of the table. And then you step off the table and you step down. It's well, that shot didn't work. That's just real awkward to look at. And you'd be doing this you're doing this turn and walk sideways completely blind, and you just step on the table. So blocking walls all around there, invisible walls, to make sure that you can't get accidentally step on things that you're not supposed to. And those are everywhere. You can't get stuck in any of these doorways, you can't get on top of any of these boxes. Everything is just, you're allowed to stand on the floor, and that's it. The floor is anti-lava. That's the only place you're allowed to stand. So I've loaded the map up in the editor because I wanted to talk a little bit about how this TV is put together. It's a little bit more intricate than you might think at first. Because it turns out in this game, when you want to put texture on a wall like this, you have basically two options. You can either just have a wall and stick a texture on it, and that's what all of these walls are, and this door is just a texture on a wall, and the Mark V sign, and this blue bit, and these walls, this stuff. This is all just textures on the side of walls. The other option is that you can have a sprite that is stuck on the wall, and that's what these gratitude wall is. These are just individual objects that you can move around. Same with the magic cards and this light thing. These are just objects that are stuck to the wall, and that can get you through most things that you want to do in terms of vertical aligned textures. But for this TV, I wanted to have this inner bit, which is the actual thing that's being shown, and then this outer bit, which is the TV. And it turns out having a texture that is wrapped around something else is a little bit more complicated. So the way that this is built is there are actually two incredibly thin sectors, two incredibly thin, tiny rooms that are stuck to the side of this thing. If I stretch them out a bit so you can see what they actually look like. We actually have two rooms where the floor and ceiling have been brought down, and so we first have this section, which is the actual TV sprite from the game. This is a standard Duke3D sprite, and then we have another hole punched in. So this is a hole punched in the wall with this TV texture on it, and then there's a second hole punched in that, which has the RoadQuest texture on it. And then it's all flattened so that when you actually look at it for real, like if I shrink this back down again, when you look at it for real, you basically can't tell. If you get real close and look at it, you can almost see like a row of black pixels here, where the floor of that sector is, and then another one down here where the floor of that sector is. But for the most part, it's just there's a hole punched in the wall with a TV texture in it, and there's a hole punched in the TV texture with the RoadQuest texture in it, and that's all very flat. The same trick over here, incidentally, with the Mark V image is this is another sector that's been punched in the wall and is made extremely thin in order to punch a hole in this wall and have the Mark V texture applied to it. Because you can't have just arbitrary walls. Everything is a floor or a ceiling. So this is a floor, this is a ceiling, and you can move to get objects like this, you can just move the floor up, but you can't, the walls are just between other floors or between floors and ceilings. You can't have like a gap in the middle here. So in order to get a gap in the middle here, we had to punch a hole in the wall and have a second sector behind it with the texture on it. Alright, so back in the game proper, let's continue the tour as we go down the hallway. This prop room gag, I really thought came together quite well. So I have the vines crawling on the wall from the alien infestation and a bunch of the alien eggs just sitting there. And then when you get too close, the door automatically shuts. So that's just a trigger that happens when you get to about here in the hallway. The door shuts in front of you, which I thought was just a neat little gag. The one tiny detail of this that I really liked was that you can actually see like the vines sticking out under the door even when it's shut. I think you can actually see this in the fly-through that they did in the show. They hang on this door for a moment and you can actually see this down at the bottom of the screen. But in terms of what's actually behind there, if we use the cheat code to open the door, there's obviously nothing around this corner because I put something there that you can't see, and like some of these edges are a little bit uneven, but you can't actually see them when you're doing the walkthrough because the door shuts from so far away. So it's basically just a bunch of eggs and a bunch of the weird viney texture to just give enough of an impression that you can see it from down the other end of the hallway. And then that takes us to the studio itself, which obviously is the other thing that took a lot of time to build. And I'm not 100% happy with how this came together. It's a little bit rushed. It could use a lot more decorating and a bit more variety in some of the stuff, but you're not in here for very long during the fly-through, and it works, like everything reads, but it's just a little bit sparsely decorated for my taste. But yeah, we have the live set with another TV built the same way as the one in the friend zone, with just the live animation on the thing, and a bunch of chairs. Fun fact, these chairs are like one of the very, very small number of objects in this game to actually have sprites for when you're looking at it from different directions. Almost everything just has like a single sprite that looks the same from every direction, aside from like enemies and these chairs and like one or two other things, because it's vitally important that chairs rotate properly. I don't know. Some of the decisions this game makes are a little bit odd. But then you have all of these cubes, which obviously, like on the real set, they're not all. It's not just a complete grid of cubes. There are a bunch of like missing spaces with wall behind them, but that turned out to be a bit more work than it was worth. So I just built the whole thing. And again, you're not usually looking at this for very long. You walk in, you see this, and then you just immediately turn around to see Paul. So this just got this treatment. I don't think you even see this in the run through that when I was doing my practice runs, I'd like walk in here to this point so you could see that and then turn around. Whereas in the walkthrough that they did on live, they walk to here and then turn. so you don't actually end up seeing any of this, which, you know, is fine. I'm happy with this not being seen. This is not an integral part of the operation. And then over here on the AFK set, I didn't bother populating any of these shelves. Obviously there's stuff on all of these shelves even when they're doing live, but I just, you know, stuck a bookshelf down here, stuck some of these cubicles, and just left them empty. Because again, this is, A, it's in the dark, you're not supposed to look at this bit, but B, it was just more work than it was worth. But I do think that it should have had more clutter over here. There's always junk on this side of the room. If you watch the fly-throughs, there's always some amount of junk down here. It's different every time, obviously, but they're like, well, we've got to stuff this stuff somewhere. This part isn't on shot. Just cram it all in the AFK set. So I've got some spare chairs, a traffic cone, and a vacuum cleaner, because those are the things that I saw when I was scrolling through the tile set. That I was like, you know what, let's just stick that in there. And the ladder around the corner, because they have a ladder. But we have lights and a video camera pointing at the actual set, which is much more well lit and is supposed to draw your eye that way, as it should. And then we have the actual thing that you're in this area to look at, which is the tech desk, which has, you know, some screens showing some important status of a map of the area and a nuclear missile silo, because obviously Paul has control of nuclear missiles, and a bunch of cabling and a knife, because, you know, just in case. You cannot make a set like a movie set without a clapperboard. Like, it's just not allowed. You can't get away with not having a clapperboard. Even if they don't actually have a clapperboard at the moon base, that doesn't matter. You need to have a clapperboard in your set. And then, you know, random keyboard, random technical texture that has a bunch of random technical texture that has a bunch of vertical lines on it that, you know, works well enough as an audio mixer. Come on, get out. There we go. And for Paul himself, this was like a complete accident. I just stuck a chair here, and then I stuck this sprite in front of it, which is just one of the walking poses. It's like walking. It's like one of the walking poses viewed at like a 45-degree angle, as opposed to like viewed straight on. And it looks sort of crouched down, so I used that one for the stand-in for Paul looking at the equipment. And when I loaded it up, I was like, oh, it just looks like he's sitting in the chair. So I like moved these around so that it looked more like he was sitting in the chair, and then here it is. But he's not actually sitting there. Like, he's standing in front of it. But from this angle, it looks right, and, you know, it looks like he's talking into the microphone, looking at the screens, and reaching for the keyboard. Like, that all just worked. That was all serendipity. Like, none of this was planned. I just picked this sprite, and it happened to line up with a lot of things. So I'm quite happy with that. So that's about it for Studio C. There's one last thing in Studio C, which is like, this was obviously a custom texture, but the only last thing that was a custom texture was this wall. I just made a single texture that was just like a simple color and plastered it over this wall for their green screen wall. Now, in theory, I shouldn't have had to do this, because I've loaded up in the editor so that I can tinker. There is an easier way to do this, which is to just, instead of actually making an entire custom texture, we can just take an existing texture in the game that happens to have a particularly bright green spot, and then I can just slide that over to the bright green bit and stretch the texture out, and voila, it just looks like a solid patch of wall, and I can like copy that over the existing wall, and then bravo, we just have a solid green thing because it's zoomed in on a single pixel of this texture. And that works. Like, it looks right here, and if you loaded it up in the original Duke3D game from the 90s, it would also look right there. But the newer version of the engine that came with the Anniversary Edition, which is the only version that's currently available on Steam, it has some extra tweaks, has some extra quirks that I'll just go back to the game and show you. So the problem with that strategy is that when you actually load that into the game, it all looks fine. Like, when you come down here and you look in here, the green screen looks fine. Like, everything in here looks basically the same as it did in the other version of the map. But this version of the engine, the engine that they made for Duke3D World Tour, is like the 20th anniversary version of the game, and they added some extra stuff to the rendering engine to make use of newer technology. And one of the things that they added is ambient occlusion, screen space ambient occlusion, which is on by default and looks like butt. All it does is it puts these dark shadows in every corner and like weird shadow halos around sprites, and I reckon it looks like utter garbage. But it's on by default, so I had to expect that it would be turned on for the fly-through that they'd ran on the show. And like, I specifically told them, hey, turn this off because it looks awful, but they didn't. So it is in fact turned on the run-through that they do. And the way that this works is it's a post-processing effect. Once it's actually rendered, it draws the screen, draws what you're looking at, and then it does this extra post-processing effect, and it's like looking at the depth information. Like when it draws the screen, it also keeps track of how far everything is from the player, and it uses that information to find corners and find objects that are in front of walls. So like it's able to say, well, this is an edge where this part is like slightly closer than this part, and then there's a hard edge. Well, that's obviously something that's in front of a wall, stick a shadow behind it. And then it's able to say, well, this isn't a hard edge, like this part is the same distance from this part, but this part is like moving away from you, and then there's a corner, and then it's coming towards you. So this is a wall corner, stick some shading there. And it's neat, I guess, but it just ends up looking miserable. Especially when you have like lots of things. It just ends up looking like a garbled mess. And it doesn't always read properly, like it doesn't always render properly. Like if you look at the very top of the screen, where the wall is matching the ceiling, when it goes off the screen, there's no ceiling rendered, because the ceiling is off the top of the screen. So it doesn't know that there is a ceiling there to render a shadow onto the wall. And so the shadow on the wall sort of gets cut off at the point where it crosses over into the top of the screen. I don't know if I'm explaining that well. But you can also see that in other places if you have like when you get very close to an edge like this, because this wall is now very thin. It now thinks that the wall is very thin, so it casts very thin shadows, but it casts like a bunch of very thin shadows, so you end up with these like weird black stripes, and it's just ugly. But the worst part is that it's doing this by painting black things on the textures, I'm guessing, is how it works. Because when you come in here and you look at the green screen, it just doesn't work. Because it's obviously painting the black texture from the ambient occlusion onto the actual wall texture, and then it's doing the stretching. So it ends up stretching the black across the entire wall, which just, ugh. So yeah, obviously I didn't want them to come across this during the run through, so custom texture it was. So back in the real version of the map, once we come down here, it still looks like butt because the ambient occlusion is still on, but at least the wall isn't black. It's just green with a weird halo around it. A weird black halo around it that doesn't actually reach all the way across once the wall goes off the top of the screen, or when there's a thing in front of it, because when there's this light here, this pole for this light is covering the floor, so it doesn't know that there's a floor here to cast a shadow on the wall. So this part of the wall, which should be having a shadow from this part of the floor, isn't dark, and it's just, this just looks awful. It looks awful. Why do you do this? So yeah, turning that option off. It doesn't look quite as, like, things don't have quite as much shadow on them, but it just looks so much cleaner. So that's Studio C, and that's the last of the custom textures that I had. Everything else in here is like from the game. Obviously, I wouldn't have made these as custom textures, but from the game they fit, and I think they're kind of hilarious. So one last thing in the hallway. I don't know if you've noticed, they have a lot of power plugs in their hallway. Like, Jesus Christ, why do you have so many power plugs in your hallway? Like, I have a guess that all of these windows, maybe they used to be like individual offices. Because like when they moved into that moon base, they tore down all the interior walls and rebuilt it. And maybe when it was originally laid out, these were individual offices and they were like walls here. And then like the hallway might have been on the other side of the building. And so each of these rooms would have had their own power points. But now that it's just a hallway, there's just a billion power points down this wall. And I never noticed until I started paying close attention to every single surface, trying to build this map for the fly through. And that's the long and short of my tour of this space. It's all basically what you see is what you get. There's nothing that's built into the areas you can't get to. It's just literally just build the areas that you see in the fly through, get them as good as they can get, and don't worry about anything else. And I think it came together quite well. The friend zone is the part that, like I said, I'm the most proud of in terms of like the decor, but also in like the dimensions. I'm pretty sure that this is a pretty accurate representation of the size of this room in terms of like relative distances in every direction and height and width, and I'm pretty sure this corner is actually supposed to be square and it's not, but that's like it. That's like the only thing that I wasn't able to quite get right in terms of watching all of the actual fly-throughs from LoadingReadyLive's past and like Commodore Hustles that have different camera angles, and trying to piece together how this room actually looks from every angle. And yeah, I'm pretty sure all the dimensions in this area are right. However, the hallway, I'm pretty sure is too short. Like, the real hallway I'm pretty sure is longer than this. And then the studio I'm pretty sure is smaller than this. I ended up stretching this hallway multiple times, trying to make it just a little bit longer to try to fit everything in. But it just, if you stretch it too much, it just ends up boring, which, you know, is fair. The real hallway is boring, but, you know, why be constrained by reality if you don't have to? And then the studio is just way too big. It's like too big by half. The main cause of that is just all of these boxes. Making the boxes the right size to fit floor to ceiling. And have, like, the room is about 6 boxes tall, floor to ceiling, and then making them square makes this wall this wide, and then making this wall this wide means that the room has to be this big. And I could have tried to shrink these down, but the main way to do that would have been to lower the roof or lower the ceiling, and I'd already built like all of the friend zone with this ceiling height in mind. I didn't really want to do that, and like the ceiling height looks good. Like, I think this is about the right ceiling height. I'm not 100% sure that that's the right explanation for why I made this room so big, but it's obviously the wrong size, because when you go to the editor, it doesn't line up. Yeah, because in the editor, when we actually go to the map view, you can see that this studio is really big. It takes up this entire space compared to, like, this is the friend zone and this is the hallway. There's a prop room over here. And this just doesn't make any amount of sense, because like this doorway here is a doorway that's supposed to lead to the equipment room, and then there's a door here in Studio C that is also supposed to lead to the equipment room, but it just doesn't. These doors just don't line up. Like, this door should be over here somewhere, and then there should be equipment room in this space, and then like this door over here in the hallway is supposed to lead to Studio B, which is supposed to be in this space, and then the studio, like the Studio C itself, should only be like this big, maybe, instead of like the behemoth it actually is. So it's obviously just far too large. And ultimately that doesn't really matter, because like you don't see this, you don't get to actually make this comparison of like seeing down here and seeing that like that's almost, that wall on the right is almost as far away as that wall on the left. That doesn't, you don't actually get to make this comparison. You see running up this way down the hallway, and then you turn the corner, and like your sense of scale, like the sense of scale is still a little bit off. Like, if you're really looking at it, you can see that this is just doesn't, even if you don't immediately see why it doesn't make sense, it does feel a little off, but it's pretty fine. But ultimately, like, if there was one thing I could fix about this level to actually make it better, would be to make this room the right size. But I tried and I couldn't make it work. So this is what it is, and I think it's fine. I think it's ultimately fine. Like, it's not a game-breaking problem. It niggles at me a little. That's all. While I've got in the editor, there are a couple of other things that I want to show off. The first is this room here, which is the starting area. That's what this little grey arrow means. And when you actually load this area up, it's completely black. There is nothing here. Like, if we put an actual wall texture here so that we can actually see what's going on, this is just, there's nothing. It's just completely black room. But there is a teleporter, a little transport sector here, that when you take that teleporter, it takes you into the hallway. So that when you start the level, you get maybe like a frame of black screen, and then it teleports you here to do the actual stuff. And you might be asking, well, why do you do that? That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Well, the reason we do that is in the actual game of Duke3D, like in the real levels that ship with the game, at the end of, like, really early on, like the end of like the second level, you get captured, and then the next level starts with you in death row on an electric chair, and all of your items are gone. You don't have any weapons, you don't have any inventory, everything's just gone. And I wanted to use that feature for this map, because I thought it doesn't make a lot of sense for you to be running through the moon base with a pistol. Like, I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to have that in the fly-through. I didn't want that to be a thing that they could do either on purpose or by accident. I just didn't want that to be an option. I want you to start with no weaponry whatsoever. In fact, I actually went whole hog and I gave them instructions to say, like, this is how you can remove all of the HUD if you want to. Like, you can remove the overlays for, like, health and ammo, as well as like not holding a gun. You can remove, like, the health and ammo and remove the crosshairs and just have, like, a completely clean feed, which is what the Chewer earlier on in this video looked like. But really, I didn't want you to be holding a weapon. That just didn't fit the vibe. So the question is, well, how did they do that? Like, is there some setting on the level you can set, or some flags that you can tick to make it so that when you load into a level, you don't have any weapons? Like, obviously that's a thing the game can do. How does it do it? And it turns out the way that they did that is with a bit of a hack. There isn't like some flag you can set. What it actually is if the sector that you start in, the floor texture is a hurty texture, like the electric chair, then you start with no inventory. So if you start in a sector where the floor is this like electrocuting floor, which is the texture from the electric chair, or it's the green slime or lava, then when you start the game, you start with no inventory. And that's just how the game works, which is a bit of a hack, but, you know, it works, it's usable. So you start in this black space that has the hurty floor that's been palletized to be just pure black, and if you stayed in this room, it would start electrocuting you, but it instantly teleports you into the actual main area before that has a chance to happen. So you get the effect of starting with no weaponry, but you get to start in the... but you don't get electrocuted and you get to immediately start in here. So it's a bit of a mess, but it is what it is, and that's how this works. And that's just how you have to work when you're dealing with these old game engines. And speaking of how you have to work when you're dealing with these old game engines, these walls, you may notice that they are different brightnesses. And that makes an amount of physical sense. Like, this wall should be brightly lit by this ceiling light, and so should this one because it's facing the lights. But this one should be a bit darker because it can't get lit by these lights in the hallway. It only get lit by like these lights over here, which are a bit further away. So you should have like these shades, and like this is something that you can see in real life. Like, if you go to to a room in real life, I presume you have one nearby, and look at the corners of the room, they will be slightly different shades, usually. Like, you can get them to where they're coincidentally very close to the same shade, but usually they'll be slightly different. It just depends on the angle of the wall and where the lights are and what angle they are make with the lights and those sorts of things. And it makes it so that you can actually see these corners. Like you can easily see where the corner is, where this wall turns around. But the game doesn't do that for you. If you load up the game by default, everything is like flat shaded. And this is a little hard to look at. Like, if you look up here where the wall meets the ceiling, or look at this orange stripe, you can sort of see the shape of the wall, but if you look down here, you can't make out anything. It just looks like a flat wall. Especially like down the bottom here, where even the defining features of the shape of the wall, like where it meets the floor, are hidden behind like this couch and this cabinet. You can't actually see anything down here. So it just looks like a flat wall. And then this painting sort of looks like it's floating because its perspective like it's at this angle, but the wall just looks flat. So you can't actually, it just looks wrong. You can't actually see the corner. So you have to manually go through every single wall and make sure that no two walls that meet at a corner have the same shade. And you just need to do that manually because this is an old game engine. Like, this game is very old. Like, this game came out like a year after Doom, maybe 2. I don't know the exact date off the top of my head. But yeah, computers back then went very fast, and anything that you could have the computer not do, like calculate dynamic lighting, you didn't. And you just made the level designer put shading on everything. And like, obviously newer games have the opposite problem. Like, if you're building a game for like the absolute cutting edge game engine, you wouldn't get away with being able to make a chair that is just like a flat piece of ground with some cushions textured on it, and then a slightly higher flat piece of ground for armrests and backrests, and that's it. Just this boxy thing that counts as a sofa. You wouldn't get away with that. You would need to have it much more intricately detailed, because that's what computers are capable of now. But back then, this is all computers could do. So this is all you could get away with. You could get away with this, but on the other hand, you had to do things that you would like the computer to do for you, but it just can't. And this is all the more obvious when you come into the Studio C, because we want some really big like dynamic lighting here. We want, well, not dynamic lighting, but like dynamic range of lighting between the lit up live set with all of these lights pointing at it, and the really dark AFK set, and the shadows around the tech desk, because this is part of the look of this part of the fly-through, is that everything here is well lit, and then you turn around to Paul, who's in darkness overseeing everything, and he gives the final line of the intro. And so, but the way that you have to do this is you literally have to divide this room into separate sectors around these arcs where we want the lighting to go, and then individually these are like now separate floors that you can set separate shading on, and you just need to go through each one by one and like manually adjust the shading until it looks kind of right and like has a decent gradient between the lit area and the dark area. And like the same on the ceiling, same on the back wall. Like, all of these walls need to be individually shaded according to how lit it should be. So like these walls are all pretty well lit. These walls are all dark. This corner is reasonably well lit, even though it should be shaded from these lights, because the door's open and it should be lit from these windows. So that's all some things that you just have to go through every single wall and floor and ceiling and one by one to just make sure that they are shaded correctly. One last thing is this secret room, which was basically my dumping ground for stuff. Because this game has a lot of stuff in it. Like, if I just bring up the list of all of the images that are in this game, I can just scroll through it for a while, because there is just lots and lots of things in this game. This is incidentally all of the custom ones that we added. But that's just in amongst this giant scroll of mess, and a lot of this is not useful. But some of it I wanted to actually use in the level. So every time I was scrolling through the list looking for something, if I saw something else that looked like it might be useful, I dumped it in this room, which you just can't get to in the actual game. So I don't know what I was looking for when I found, this grid of boxes, which if I remember rightly is from like an area of the game that's in a theatre with a changing room. So that's why these boxes have like a bunch of wigs in them, and then like people's lunch, and like shoes and stuff, because that's the sort of thing that you have in like cubicles in a changing room. But yeah, so I dumped that here. I dumped this here because I thought maybe there'd be like a filing cabinet in one of the offices that I never ended up building. But then I ended up using it, like I said before, as the drawers in the kitchen, just stretched out. And then we have these lights and this chair, this scary looking knife, which I wanted to find a place for and then did. Also like these ropes that did pretty good duty as like the cabling hanging on the wall behind the tech desk. There's these microphones. Didn't end up using the full-on microphone stand because obviously they don't use this sort of microphone system for anything. Like all of their live mics are like booms or hanging from the ceiling stuff, so they don't really have mics on stands. But I did use this little desk mic on Paul's desk. And we have this light, and this camera, and then this other camera. This is the camera I actually found first when I was scrolling through, because this film camera is actually a pair with the light. They went together there's a level built into the game that's just set in a movie studio. So there is a movie set that has the light and the camera, and also the director's chair. But I didn't end up using any of the other assets in this area, like the exploded corpse, for what should be reasonably clear reasons. And then we just have some other stuff in here, like this is where I practiced putting these vines, these stretchy out vines on the wall and the floor to see how that all worked. And for some reason I thought they'd have a hat rack. I don't know why I thought they'd have a hat rack. They don't. This lamp I was actually surprised by. Like, I was sure I'd put this lamp somewhere. Like, I thought I'd put this lamp on like this little side table here, because I thought it would make sense there, but they don't have a lamp there in the actual moon base. All of their lighting is just the ceiling lights, and that's all they need. So they didn't use that lamp anywhere, so it's relegated to the secret room. I don't know why I grabbed the bubblegum machine. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Like, I don't know why I grabbed it, but I put it here, and I'm not getting rid of it. So yeah, that obviously didn't make the cut. And speaking of things that didn't make the cut, is the other thing that isn't in this level, which is anything that's interactive. There's basically only one moving part in the whole level, which is the prop room door, and you don't interact with that. That just automatically shuts when you get close to it. So we have the swinging door set up, but it's just automatically set off by this touch plate when you get close. And that's the only thing in the level that actually moves at all. There's no enemies, there's no collectible items, there's no doors that you can actually just manually open, there's no switches that you can switch, there's nothing that is actually interactive. And that wasn't the case for quite a while I was actually planning this out. For a while I considered doing all sorts of things. Like, for a while I thought this door was going to open and you could actually see the toilet behind that and the bathroom in there. For a while this door to the studio was shut, and you had to like manually open it in order to actually get into the studio. That there was for a while I thought that like this light switch next to the front door, for a while I thought that was actually going to work. You could flick this and have the lights turn off. These are all things that I considered, but ended up just basically throwing them away for the same reason that I have like these blocking walls around all of the couches and stuff. It's all supposed to make it so that it's easier to actually do the fly-through as an actual thing, because ultimately I'm not building a level that's supposed to be an actual level. Like, you couldn't take this and turn it into an actual level. Even if you've, like, built all of the other rooms and stuff, that's not what this is for. So it's the same reason I didn't build out the dining room, and I didn't build out the all of these other offices that are behind closed doors. I didn't even build out the equipment room, and like the equipment room is often open. Like if you look at past Loading Ready Lives, the doors to the equipment room are often open, and you can see in there. I could have built that just as a thing that you walk past, but I didn't want to build anything that wasn't necessary for the actual fly through. I built literally just the rooms that you walk through, and this one joke room, and that's it. Because that's what the thing is for. So got rid of all of the interactivity, got rid of all of the doors that were openable, all the switches. There's not even like an end of the level switch. Like you can't beat this level as a video game level. But none of those things made sense to include. So it's a very static level. It has one moving part, and then everything else is just as it is. And that's basically it. That's all I wanted to talk about, and I've been talking for way too long as it is. So I'm going to stop now and be done with this. If you have any questions about this that I somehow didn't get to, you can hit me up on the comments here or on Discord or what have you. If you want to download the map and check it out for yourself, I'll stick a link in the description. Don't bother liking, sharing, and subscribing, because I basically don't use this channel, and you will basically be signing up for absolutely no videos until like 7 months from now, when I upload like a bunch of Destiny clips, and you go, why on earth am I getting recommended all of these Destiny clips? So I don't use this as a channel, so don't bother subscribing. Yeah, have a good one. Enjoy life.